Thanks everybody and welcome to my presentation. My name is Xistouris, as Derek mentioned, and I'm the CEO of AC3. Just before I get started, I just want to take a moment to actually thank the whole GovDC team for hosting the event today. We were here last year, and when the opportunity presented itself to come back this year, we absolutely jumped at it. It's a fantastic forum for both industry and also government to get together and collaborate, so it's great to be here. Thanks for having us. It's fantastic. Thanks, guys. My presentation today is going to touch on the digital strategy that's been announced earlier this year, and we're taking an extract of that and trying to give a real-world example of how we're implementing the strategy on a day-to-day basis. Out of curiosity, how many people have read the New South Wales Digital Government Strategy that was released earlier in the year? Okay, there's a few of you guys. That's great. So again, as I mentioned, I'm going to try and zoom in and zoom out on the strategy and talk about how we've interpreted that strategy and what we're doing at a practical level to kind of implement that in the field. If you haven't read the strategy, it's all good. There's no test, there's no exam. You can't fail my presentation. It's all good. So in terms of how we've gotten here, I've got a bit of a roadmap in terms of all the different strategies and the roadmaps that have been announced over the last few years, and how the government has pivoted and changed its strategy as the market has changed as well and evolved to where it is today. So just going back through some of the highlights, in 2012 the data center reform strategy was announced, which was the underpinning strategy for where we are today. Later, the following year in 2013 and 14, the Silverwater and Untitled facilities were opened. And in response to that, from a strategy perspective, we as a business started to move our equipment into the data center for all our government customers. In 2014, the first iteration of the GovDC Marketplace was announced, and our response to that was to create and publish our service catalogue. And the presentation today and the stuff that's happening downstairs, it's a great evolution from where it is, or where it was, to where it is today. Back then it was a paper-based system where people used to make inquiries with DFS. They used to send us an email that someone's called them. Now we've gone to a complete digital experience, which is fantastic. In 2014 and 15, Digital Plus was announced, and then our response to that, we took away cloud and as a service, and we really started to push that agenda with our customers and talk to them about the strategy and how they can adopt that in a practical sense. And last year, Digital Plus 2016 was announced, and our takeaway out of that was around procurement and the Procure IT framework. So we started talking to our customers specifically about that. So the message here is that every time the government's announced a strategy or a reform, what we've tried to do is look at that and then take that into the marketplace and take that into our customers for their benefit. And I'll talk about how that makes sense a little bit later. The new strategy for 2017, which was announced in May, touches on a number of key priorities, ministerial priorities, and they are customer experience, data, and digital on the inside. And as the topic of my discussion is digital on the inside, that's what I'm going to be focusing on. So in terms of alignment, again, going back to the strategy itself, when the strategy was first announced, and I was reading through this again, understanding what it means for us, how can we better align, there was a couple of passages that resonated for me, and I'm going to read this out, and it'll explain what I mean. So from the digital strategy, it says that the vision is to transform the lives of people of New South Wales by designing policies, services that are smart, simple, and seamless. We will develop a data-informed and agile public service. We will make government services easy to use, cut complexity, and streamline processes. Out of our brand guidelines, it says that we, AC3, our brand personality is simple, smart, and straightforward. Our brand proposition is that we cut through complexity to let you focus on what matters most. So reading that, some of that language and some of the words that were being used were very similar. Like some of the language itself is actually the same words. So at first I was like, we must be using the same marketing agency or the same PR agency, the same words are being floated around. But then I started to think, okay, well, given that we've aligned ourselves all the way, it kind of makes sense, and it's actually resonating quite loudly for us. So in terms of why I've chosen this topic, this is really the start of, for us, why we picked it. Understanding the message, and for us, its interpretation. Different organisations and different departments will interpret the message from the strategy differently, depending on their maturity levels. And this is what we've taken out of it. If you're just starting out on your journey, change the way you're thinking. Look at what other departments and agencies are doing and try and follow in their footpath. If you're already on your way, continue to build on your digital presence. Look at the reforms and the strategies that have been announced and try and dovetail in behind those. Look at what people are saying in the public and in forums like this and try and align in those ways. And finally, if you're already on your journey and you're well down that path, continue to experiment and try new ways of doing things. And in this particular instance, our takeaway is really try and partner with organisations that are doing things on the edge or doing things differently that can help you stay ahead. Now, instead of the ministerial priorities, I touched on these before. First one being customer experience, having the customer at the centre of everything you do. Data, there is no more important asset than usable and accessible data. And then digital on the inside, which is today's discussion. Underpinning those are the enablers, and I'll just flick through those because these are stuff that's in the public domain. And what I wanted to draw out of this slide is specifically where we sit as a business, as a provider, an MSP, offering services out of the marketplace. It makes sense for us to focus on digital on the inside using technology. That's where we fit in. And the message is for you, look for where you fit in on the strategy and how you can interpret it to make it work for yourself. So using this lens, I've got a couple of practical use cases that I want to talk about. And this is me zooming out or zooming in on specific use cases where we're using the strategy and we're drawing a direct line of sight into a practical application of that strategy. In this example, it's a service desk integration project. Sounds pretty simple. I'll run you through it. The use case is a government agency that will remain nameless. The service is an outsourced service desk that we're providing. The reason why the agency decided to outsource was, number one, they wanted to reduce their total cost of ownership over the entire service. They wanted to improve their SLAs, and they also wanted increased coverage times. The challenge for us was that the agency wanted all the data that we were collecting as the outsourced agency, or as the outsourcer of that service, for them to have that access as well. And the second part was to also have access for their people that are on their inside. So their level 2 and level 3 support people wanted to have access to that information so they could act or escalate a ticket or an issue if it so happened. What it looked like, very basically, from a top level down, we've got a consumer of that service, which happens to be I might say that. It's a consumer of the service which is outside of the agency. They would self-serve using a portal, or they'd call up using phone. They would hit our first line support desk. We would take that call, and the scope of the service included knowledge, incident, service request, and user authentication ID. We would take that information. If we were able to resolve the issue or the ticket, we would go off and do that. If we weren't, we would basically allocate that to a separate resolver, which was on the customer side. And by doing that, by having that process, what we had done was replicated our instances together. So in terms of our service desk instance and the customer service desk instance, what we did is we integrated those and had them seamlessly replicating. So the information that we were capturing as an MSP was being ported across to the customer side, and then they would use that information for the two challenges that they had: to retain the information in case they wanted to terminate the service or move on, or for their second level or third level people that wanted to action a ticket that was allocated to them. Okay, this is taking a bit longer. The result at the end of the project, which was a very short and succinct engagement, I think Derek touched on it. We delivered this project in about, I think, 7 weeks. Overall, the net result was that we were able to automate the information sharing between both sides. We eliminated process duplication in terms of what we were doing and what the customer was doing. And even there's third parties that extend beyond our reach where they're accessing the service as well. We improved the user experience through a self-service portal. In fact, out of all the tickets that we're logging and we're resolving, 74% of the interactions are actually being resolved and allocated through the self-service portal, which is a fantastic result. Seamless process flow for the resolver groups. So irrespective of us being the resolver or the customer being the resolver or a third party being the resolver, the process flow for that ticket would be the same all the way through. And then finally, the obvious one in relation of paper-based processes. So overall, very simple use case, but again, it aligns and there's a direct line back to the strategy around digital on the inside using technology. Some helpful tips for this particular engagement first one is streamline process interfaces. What we found is those handoffs between level 1, level 2, to level 3, and then even the third parties, those handoffs typically took the longest time for them to be resolved. So it used to sit in someone's queue, or it used to sit with someone before they picked it up. Streamlining those processes and digitising those was part of the process up front to identify. Systems are much more powerful when they do integrate, and this is a bit of a plug again back to ServiceNow. We happen to be using a ServiceNow instance internally. Our customer was using a ServiceNow instance. Integrating those two instances just made a lot of sense. It was easier for us to do that. It was less laborious. It gave us a head start, in fact. And if you're not able to have the right type of tooling, look for APIs in the tooling. And what we're starting to talk to our customers, if they're on a different system than what we are, do they have open APIs? Can we integrate with the system that they have with what we have? Place an emphasis on those APIs as part of your selection process, because it does make a difference in terms of delivering the end-to-end service. And then finally, the process maturity levels. There's no point in having an automated system that orchestrates and transforms data between two sides if an SLA on one side is 5 minutes, replicates to the other side, and there's a 20-minute SLA. So those process maturity levels need to be aligned before the technology platform gets implemented. It makes no sense otherwise. Okay, second use case. This one's for the Department of Justice, and thanks to the guys for letting us use them as a reference site. The use case here is actually an online service catalogue. The reason why we wanted to develop this service with DOJ was to reduce the time from the order of service to the delivery of service. So someone wanted to say, yes, we want to provision a workload or add some disk or whatever it may be, the lag time between that and actually getting the service provisioned. And the second part was the automation and orchestration of services. Wherever possible, what we were trying to do is orchestrate that with as little human interaction as possible. The challenges in this project were workflow process approval, and this is not the financial process approval, it's the non-financial stuff. So having the right level of technical people through the process to endorse the change and make that and follow that through. The financial delegation, who can sign off on things when there's an increase in the spend, and conversely, who can sign off on that when there's a decrease. So having those delegations identified was important. And the last one is identifying the high value use cases. And these are not necessarily ones that are the ones that cost the most amount of money. It's the processes that we can gain the most efficiencies from. The ones that were repeatedly being used, picking those ones out and then honing in on them. What it looked like from an end user perspective was a user, and typically this would be an IT person inside of the IT department requesting a service, would browse to the portal or the marketplace. They would check out the catalogue. They'd place an order on a service, and then that would kick off the workflow approval process. And in this example, there's a number of hurdles or barriers where we had to go through to get the service approved. Capacity management, business service owner, endorsing officer, commercial analyst, and even the commercial manager before that service would be provisioned automatically. So once that was sought or approved, a separate set of governance would kick in terms of change management, and it's a separate workflow approval process that needs to go through using the ITSM tooling to make sure the service could be fulfilled. And then fulfillment was the final one. And in this instance, we've got two mechanisms for fulfillment. We were able to orchestrate some things, so it would automatically provision a service, take a workload, dispatch instructions, orchestrate that workload, provision it. And then some services, what we've done is we've taken it all the way to automate and digitize the process and the forms, but then it stops there and someone picks it up manually and executes that ticket, executes that request. And the idea is as we become more mature and as the service advances, we'll try and digitize those services as well. And the last one was the customer order is then complete. I've got a very quick slide here, and I won't labour on this. I kind of toyed with the idea of not putting it in, but this is a very high-level view of what the platform looks like. There's the service portal that sits out front. Then there's an orchestration platform that sits in the middle, and then there's the actual systems at the bottom. Very high level. It works its way all the way through. It is very complicated, and I'll explain why I put this slide in, why I did put it in the next slide. But the idea is that it's a complicated process, but the technology can be done, and it's being done out there today. That's the behind the scenes. In terms of the results, for us it was a fantastic outcome. We're able to have a standardized approach for consuming services via the portal. So irrespective of whether it's a workload or disk or whatever it may be, that process flow was the same. We eliminated process duplication for the orchestration piece. We developed a repeatable process that created operational efficiency, and that, to be honest, is mostly on our part, where we have engineers or people doing things. Once the request comes through, we've been able to automate that, so we've reduced our cost of delivering that service, and in turn, we're trying to provide cost savings back to the customer. Remove the need for manually provisioning of services. Again, having a repeatable process that's automated makes it a lot easier and consistent. Manual quoting, we haven't gone away from this, and we're working towards this, but having quotes that have been sent via email in Excel or PDF that come back and forth, keeping track of those, the status of that quote, we've gone away with that using the portal. Consistent user experience, someone that's using the portal is familiar with it, they can basically consume any type of service, and the paper-based processes again. So again, another another good use case for aligning with the strategy, digital on the inside, using technology and delivering services in that way. Some helpful tips that we found along the way in this project. Workshop the process. In this instance, we took a lot of time to actually identify the approval process, understanding who needs to sign off on a change request, whether it's governance in terms of the ITSM sense or governance in terms of financial sense. Release early and release often. I showed that complicated diagram of the back-end system. That took us a lot of time to get up and running. In hindsight, what we should have done was release parts of that platform quicker than what we did to get it out there and give our customer a taste of the service. Seek and encourage feedback. When we did release, what we found was people were coming back to us with ideas. Have you thought of this? Can you add this feature? What about this particular service? Can we orchestrate that? Can we put that on the catalog? In fact, what we ended up doing was we created a catalog item that was seeking requests. So if anyone, or seeking feedback rather, so people would go to the service catalog and look for something. If they weren't able to find it, log a request for us to create a catalog item for it. So that was a good one for us. And don't forget about the governance. So as I mentioned, there's technical side, there's the technical governance, there's the commercial governance. All that stuff needs to basically dovetail in together. The technology side is easy. Doing it is the easy part, but getting that process side is just as important. Okay, just in summary, I wanted to draw out, again, just two practical examples at a low level on what the strategy looked like for us and how we're implementing that in the real world. In summary, just the walkaways from my perspective is, it seems obvious, but consider projects that are aligned with the New South Wales Digital Government Strategy. If you're considering a project, if you can somehow weave it back to the strategy, you've got a better chance of getting funding for it, you've got a better chance of getting that project off the ground. For us, in our sphere of influence, projects that centre around service desk, user portal, e-forms are good targets to start exploring. Look in that area, scratch the surface. What can you do in that space that can digitise? And then don't boil the ocean. If I go back to the DOJ example with the service catalogue, when we finally launched, we launched with just 3 catalogue items. So we didn't go out there and have a list of hundreds of catalogue items. We launched with 3, and as we've matured and developed those catalogue items, we've included more of them into the portal. Okay, that's pretty much it, guys. Hopefully you were able to draw a bit of a correlation between the strategy at a high level and a low level. If there is any questions, gladly take them either here or downstairs on the floor. We've got a booth P1, I think. We're also doing a bit of a talk later on about service integration and management and the governance piece around that. So come check us out at that talk as well. So thanks, guys.